Well, it is 4 o'clock, and we're going to go ahead and get started. I see we've got several folks on the call. My name is Dave Nagel. I'm very excited to kind of share an overview of the framework of Common Formative Assessments 2.0 and what some of the science teachers across the state of South Dakota have engaged in here over the last year. So we're going to go ahead and get started, but I am going to introduce first Sam Shaw, the Team Leader Division of Learning and Instruction for South Dakota Department of Education. So Sam, I'm going to let you get us kicked off and kind of talk a little bit about what the work has been so far and what you've seen, and just an overview of the process so far.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dave. All right. Well, just to give you guys some background on how this training opportunity came about. About I think it was spring of last year, about this time last year, we found out we had some leftover assessment funds, and we really wanted to find a way to really start a discussion, particularly with science educators, to really try to continue our science standards implementation conversation that we've been having for the past couple of years that really preceded our 2015 adoption of our new science standards, and throughout that adoption process and then into last summer. And we wanted to start talking about how assessment in the classroom could occur. And we thought, since Becky Nelson had attended the training of Larry Ainsworth's, who's the author of Common Formative Assessments 2.0, she had a pretty good feeling about the structural aspect of this model, and we wanted to give it a shot. And so we gave it a shot first with a group of science educators, and we had almost 30 individuals that had gone through this training process. We built a timeline that spanned from last summer, about towards the end of July, that's kind of culminating and completing, I guess, at the end of or beginning of May of this year. So what we did is we built some supports throughout. Basically this cohort that was 25 teachers. We also had some coaches that came, and the summer trainings, the July 20th and 21st, was really about formalizing the people with the process, getting an understanding about the 10 steps that are involved. But then the follow-up days, into November and December, were really about Dave customizing and responding to the needs of the teachers that we had. It was very interesting because of the varying, people that we had at this training. We had kindergarten through 12th grade instructors that were working with us, and so they had different levels of content experience. They had different levels of support within their districts, and by that I mean some came from districts that were already using the Common Formative Assessment process. Some came from districts that had zero processes in place for formative assessment. So throughout this process, it was really interesting for me to see where people were moving along the bar in terms of this process, and finding ways to make it work for them regardless of the situations that they were in. So I think that I just wanted to start with kind of the successes of what I've seen so far. This process really allowed teachers to access the standards in a way that helped them structure their intentions in their classrooms. And by that I mean they're able to be intentional about structuring their curriculum or their units to develop assessments that connected directly to their standards. And so they were making decisions on what to do next based on information from their students, directly from their students. And also the teachers were really exposed to a process of unwrapping the standards and really getting to know their standards and being able to connect those expectations again to assessments. And so those two steps alone, I think, were very powerful in just providing another platform in place for teachers to come together and start talking about the expectations and our standards, and start to think about ways of really understanding if kids are able to do it or not, right? And then to be able to make and have conversations about how we can get kids to do that and meet those goals. So again, this process, it's still, it's, I guess, completing right now. We're having people turn in their second common formative assessments. They built them based around units, and we did that just in terms of a contract, so they could have some products that we could analyze and really look at to see some significant things. And I believe we did bring a teacher along today, and we may have some other people hopping in if they're able to attend today, and maybe they can give us some more information. But I just wanted to give a quick overview, and I'd like to stand by for questions. As we get towards the end of this, I know Dave's going to give a much more detailed overview of what common formative assessments are. And if you have questions about the process or about what teachers said about the process, I'm receiving all the reflections right now for their contract, and so I'm getting some very honest feedback about their successes and their challenges as well. So it'd be nice to talk with you about that if you have any questions. Dave, did I miss anything?
No, Sam, thanks so much. Jamie, are you still on the call? Can you speak? We have Jamie Tucker, one of our teachers who was going to be able to jump in. She had some conferences going on, so I might bring her in just a moment. Jamie, just let us know when you're free. Um, so I want to be very respectful of time, and one of the things that Sam and I had talked about coming into this was to provide just a little bit of an overview, especially for the administrators and leaders of the teachers who have been in the schools where these teachers have been working. And I would just say I'm very fortunate. Actually, I'm going to back up just a second here. Kind of introduce myself just a little bit before I move forward. My name is Dave Nagel. I've been working with Larry Ainsworth's Common Formative Assessment work pretty much for the last 16 years. For those of you that are familiar with Larry, I was very fortunate to be one of the teachers who Larry began his journey in developing unwrapping and power standards and some of his other work back as a classroom teacher in the early 2000s. Actually, fall of 1999 was when Larry came to my district. So I'm very fortunate that I had a chance as a teacher and also an administrator to see this work implemented. But I've been working as a sort of consultant presenter since 2003, and I can say without a doubt the group I had for the 2 days in August and July, and then the 2 days this fall, I don't just want to use the word hardworking, but it was committed to learning and developing deeper and more authentic assessment practices. And that's something that was really, really empowering to see. But back to what I was going to mention before is we will walk through Larry's 10-step process, but one of the key elements for any assessment, and I think those of us that are in the school leadership position, administrative level, to kind of guide our teachers a little bit, whether they were in the cohort or not, is really any assessment that we conduct comes down to these 3 points. What's my purpose? And then when do I have enough evidence to make an inference? And when we think about that, a lot of times we're trying to assess, well, I'm thinking at a literacy level, comprehension skills, but the assessment was more around analysis of text. Or in science, I'm really trying to assess students' understanding of the scientific method and the process, but my assessment items are more aligned to them understanding the concept of force and motion and less about the overall scientific process. So part of the shift that we've seen, and it was very apparent throughout the process and the time together with the teachers, not only in the assessments they created, but what they shared verbally towards those last couple of sessions, was the shift in how they looked at classroom assessment, which by default shifts how we look at instructional practices. Jamie, did I see you mentioned that you could hear? Are you available to chat?
Yeah, I called in on my phone, so I can see what's going on the screen, but now I can hear on my phone, so we're good.
So, Jamie, I'm going to just have you hold there just in a little bit of a holding pattern for just a moment. So I'm just going to highlight briefly, and one of the things about the CFA 2.0 process that Larry Ainsworth put together, it's not about memorizing all 10 steps. But as I walk us through here briefly, the kind of steps in blue, which is the actual creation of the common assessment. We're going to identify the priority standards, unwrap them to identify accurate rigor levels, come up with those big ideas or conceptual understandings, and then develop questions for those. But then create a quality pre and post assessment along with any scoring guides. That's really the bulk of the work that we did for the first couple of days. We'll come back to the pieces in red in just a moment. But all of these pieces, whether we do them in a specific order or not, are really just good, solid bread and butter assessment practices. And so, kind of thinking of that common formative assessment, it's really important that we're looking at anything we put in front of students, especially. And while we know there's a lot of schools across the state that are small, that are have one teacher, for example, that was in our group, that she was the science department. But in a lot of cases, we're looking at assessments that are created collaboratively. But most importantly, whether they're created collaboratively or not, They provide valuable feedback around what the students know, what they need to know, and what are the really most important elements for that unit. And I think as a former science teacher myself, far too often we can get caught up in everything we could focus on or could do in terms of tasks and assignments and assessment items and miss what's most important. Obviously, we would like them to be collaboratively designed, but they really need to be aligned so we can look at what have the students learned from the beginning of the unit to the end. And so that idea of formative assessment that we talk a lot about in terms of a buzzword in our profession, unfortunately, for the last 15 years, that hasn't provided the type of results it really could, except when teachers are focusing on what is most essential in that unit and then how does it change my practice because I'm assessing students, most importantly, to diagnose, not to put a grade in the grade book, not to make sure they've gone through the curriculum, but I am assessing students first and foremost so I know what to do differently. And so instead of hearing from me, what I would like to do is welcome Jamie Tucker, biology teacher. Jamie, I think I got your high school correct. If I didn't, please let me know. But if you wouldn't mind,
You did. I just teach chemistry instead of biology.
Chemistry instead of biology. Okay, I'm going to change that here on the screen. I'm going to go ahead and put the 10-step process back up just as a backdrop, and then I'm just going to let you speak to some of your takeaways, some of the things you've learned, and just what the shifts were in terms of anything instructionally, assessment-wise. And then if there's any questions, I would like to pause then for any on the call to defer them to myself, but also while we have Jamie on the call, to her.
Okay, so I really liked that the CFA 2.0 process started by thinking about your end goals. What do I want to accomplish in the end with my students? What do my students need to know in the end? And I liked that upfront thinking. I liked the work that upfront that you did. It was detailed, it was purposeful, and it just forced me to think about all aspects of the unit first before just diving in and kind of getting caught up in the moment and the schedule. It just really made me sit down and think about what was most important for the kids to learn, and then kind of that path about how I wanted them to learn, but how I was going to take them from where they were to get them to that point. I also liked the fact that you didn't just look at the standard, but you really broke it down in terms of what do the kids already know, or what should they know, so that I can get them to understand this, the standard. So that I can take kids from all different places and still get them, to the same endpoint. So I really liked that there was all of that upfront work that happened before you just dive into a unit and kind of see where the schedule takes you. And I also really liked creating the post-assessment and then the pre-assessment with it. Not that the two necessarily have to match perfectly, but designing that up front, I just think made my unit so much more successful, and I just felt like they were more effective and more efficient just by laying all that groundwork up front. Shifts in terms of learning, I just feel like I'm more purposeful, and I think that the kids feel that too. I think they feel like we're going somewhere. Like it's not just, we're on this roller coaster wherever the schedule kind of takes us. Like they really understand that we're going to be doing some progress checks along the way. And they also like that they're not all graded. A lot of the progress checks I do might be partner work, they might be discussions, they might be you showing me something or telling me something, but I think the kids have really come to expect a lot of those progress checks, and they like them because they understand that I haven't learned this yet, that I still get the opportunity to keep learning it. I guess that's kind of my takeaway from the whole process.
And Jamie, I would add, a lot of the other teachers had commented to me as well that the intentionality of developing the post-assessment questions first and then reflecting back and thinking about the pre-assessment items that they come into the lesson with, so students could really identify what they know first, so then they can build on that understanding with maybe something that they didn't focus on very often, And that was, I think, one of the most common things that people have been saying now that they have adopted as just common practice across all units now. Is that something similar that you're thinking about now, more about all units?
Definitely. I definitely, by making the post-assessment first, it seems like I have more time at the beginning of the unit to do that than I do when I'm at the end of the unit and trying to get review items ready and, people who are gone throughout the unit and getting them caught up. I just don't feel like I have the time to make quality assessments at the end. So it's helped to make them at the beginning. And my questions are less because they're more purposeful. Like I know, I ask a question and I'm more purposeful about why I put A as a choice or why I put B as a choice. And so I need to ask a lot less questions to accomplish the same thing.
Excellent, Jamie. And I'm sorry, I had muted myself momentarily, and I was asking you a question, and then realized that I was talking, unfortunately, to myself. But I wanted to, if you wouldn't mind, because I remember back in the fall when we were having one of our calls, we talked a little bit about the shift in how it not only adjusted what you assessed, but what you ended up, with my fingers, focused on the grading element. And so, with that said, just if you wouldn't mind speaking, if you can think of any examples. But then when we look at the process, back to the focusing on the learning progressions. So as we think about an instructional sequence, as a secondary teacher myself, sometimes we can get caught up in prescribing the medicine, calling it curriculum, before we've really identified what the patient needs and what steps they might go through. And so how that shifted some of your grading practices around that learning progression piece.
I feel like I don't feel like I take any less grades. I mean, I still feel like I'm taking the grades to put in the grade book so that, I can sort of feel comfortable with where are the kids at in their learning and also so that they understand, okay, here's my grade in this class yet, because that's just where we are in our district is we're still grading kids. And our district expects us to put in those grades, every week. And so I feel like I'm accomplishing that part of it, but yet I also feel like I'm doing way more formative assessment, that the kids feel like I can take a chance at this and I can try this. And they just feel a lot more confident in knowing that I'm not grading all of these progress checks, because they understand that it's okay that if I don't know this yet. Like, there's still an opportunity for me to learn this, and it's okay if I don't know it yet, but they're not complacent about it. They're not like, oh, well, I'll just learn it tomorrow. I feel like they're motivated by the progress checks, because they're not just accountable to me in the progress checks, like they're accountable to their partner, because they're having to explain to a partner, what to do, or having to explain to a group what to do. So, kind of sometimes even shifting that accountability, because if they're just accountable to me, it's easier for them to sometimes slack off. But if they have to be accountable to somebody else in class, I feel like they take more ownership of trying to learn something.
Sure. Jamie, thank you so much. And just to kind of pyramid off, and Sam, if you have any additional thoughts or comments here, whoops. But again, going back and again, trying to be just respectful of time and at least providing that overview of the process. Everything in the blue, we talked about identifying the priority standards, unwrapping for rigor levels, big ideas, and then that pre and post assessment. I'm going to kind of finish with just a couple of points on that. But everything that's in red is what Larry developed for Common Formative Assessments 2.0. He developed his first assessment work back in 2006, and he purposefully called it 2.0, but there's a lot of us who work directly with Larry, and it really is much more beyond the actual assessment. When we talk about the learning intentions, success criteria, and this piece here, finally, the learning progressions and the instructional sequence into those progress checks. And so part of the process is also determining what are those learning elements that we need to be checking for periodically throughout the unit, and which ones are maybe perhaps conceptual in nature that I'm checking for understanding on a general level to make sure kids are getting it, as opposed to a procedural knowledge like creating my timeline or having some of the vocabulary that is important soundly understood. I got to make sure the kids get that before they move on. And that was a piece, to be honest, that with each one of the teachers, as we got into that, said that tremendously impacted their professional learning community collaboration model, even if for the some that were possibly more singleton type teachers as they were in a smaller setting. So, Sam, just any thoughts on that? Because I felt like towards those last 2 days when we came back after building the assessment and we did the additional learning, that's where that kind of work took off. I just wondered if you had any thoughts to that, because that ties a little bit to some of the other pieces we've talked about throughout the state, moving forward with the equity piece and some of the other inquiry learning around science that the state is moving forward to.
Yeah, and I just think the value of those extra days we put on. So once we got through the 10 steps working with the teachers, but just having the space and the time to come back with other teachers is valuable regardless of process. But it just allowed them the time to get back deep into it and to take that next step. And so for a lot of them, it was running through the same steps that they had gone through, and just making sure that the level of the unpacking was where they wanted it to be. And we talked about, or I talked about the future goals of what we're trying to do with regard to science education. And at that time, we also found that, they wanted more time, right? They wanted more time to work on some of these things. Like they wanted supports on, like assessment item rating, like the ability to, write better assessment items, which we had some within this training, but they asked for more, and they wanted more content support with regard to the learning progressions, so that they could make better informed decisions about how students, of what students should know and how they could really connect units together. And that was something that was kind of a challenge for a lot of the teachers, because we didn't have formal teacher teams come for the most part. We had some that had a little bit more team support, whether it was back in their district or they had at least a partner. And so it was really interesting to hear, from those teachers about how much they wish they had a team. And so my thoughts in the future about this are, if we're supporting this effort, it really requires a commitment from the districts to support that work, and also from us to ensure that we're bringing the teams together to support people to look at those learning progressions and to really think about what students could say or what students think. And that takes a lot of thought process and a lot of communication, collaboration with other people to really dive into that and to make those assessments, like Jamie was talking about, really valuable and strong. Like we'll put an item in that says if they select answer A, this tells me that they don't completely know the entire concept. And that takes a lot of understanding about student thinking and content that you teach. So it's just I think gives me direction in terms of our efforts and in just knowing the content support that's needed out there in the field.
Yeah, Sam, and thanks for mentioning that. And just as we think about and talk about that piece around the distractor analysis, part of what an element is when we're designing the items. First, there's, as you see on the screen, there's the quality item element in terms of how you develop quality assessment items in a manner that allows for just in general multiple choice, matching, true false, constructed response. What are the things that people like James Popham, Halladine, Larry Ainsworth have said? The evidence really tells us that if we can have a complete question stem as opposed to a break in the question, we have a better chance to have less potential issues with student not understanding the question, let alone compared to if there's a misconception. Limiting humor, having all distractors be plausible. Well, that last piece, the plausible distractors, is where, and I would say this was, and it was for me as well, and it is for really any audience, but kind of an epiphany that we're really writing assessment items to have students select the best answer, not necessarily the correct one. What I mean by that is there might be a best correct answer, but there's one that tells us, okay, if you select a different choice, you're not as far off as somebody else, or that tells me that you're confusing meteor versus meteorite as opposed to when it enters the Earth's atmosphere, or you're confusing phenotype and genotype. So I'm literally designing my items, as I mentioned before, as a way to diagnose, not to just score and grade, although we can eventually certainly put it in the grade book. Just one other piece that I wanted to share, and then kind of open it up for questions, because at this stage we've kind of presented as much of the overview as I'd like to, and I really appreciate Jamie sharing what you did. But there's some resources we've developed that Sam and I will be more than happy to share that just kind of help guide not only these teachers that have been through the process, but for any administrator. For example, what's the priority standard of today's lesson? That should be a common question. If it's not, we have to pause and say, okay, we need to have a priority, and maybe it's over a couple of days. And then, what concept and skill are you really focusing on? What is really the purpose? And as a teacher, what it might help them do, and it certainly did with our group, was how to better utilize the current curriculum, not necessarily modify or change. But Sam can attest to this as well. We had a few groups who had some, with my fingers, I want to use not to use the word pet lab, but a lab or an activity that they had done for a long time. And I think initially there was some thought that, well, I'm going to have to give that up. And actually that was just the opposite, the antithesis of that. It was maybe how will we better use that lab or that activity and maybe focus on this aspect because that titration lines up more with the standard, or certain parts I'm going to give more feedback to because it really is the main focus of the standard. I'm still going to do the lab or the activity or go on the field trip, but how I look to provide students feedback and check for their learning, I think that was a big shift. And so we've got several resources that we're more than happy to share. At this stage, I would love to open up for any questions. I know we have a few folks on the call who are kind of at the administrative level or supervision level, or anybody, maybe Sam from your department, that just has a thought or a question that they would be willing to pose or to share with the group around any of the steps in the process, anything we've shared, anything at all. So does anyone have a thought that you'd like to share or a question?
And at this point, I mean, I see that Gretchen Lees is also on the call, and she was a part of this process as well. And if she'd like to add additional thoughts, now would also be a good time for that if she's open to that.
And Gretchen, I want to tell you, if you have, there's a gift card that comes with sharing anything. So even just
Oh, awesome! I'm always motivated by shopping.
Sure.
I
Gretchen,
think that
just introduce yourself and your I apologize, I didn't have a screen ready for you, but what your background is, what you teach, and then anything you can share from going through the process with the group.
Sure, right. I work at Red Cloud Indian School over on the Pine Ridge Reservation. I'm teaching 6th, 7th, and 8th grade science and health. I think the process that helped me most, the whole concept of looking through the big picture and then writing shorter tests. Like I used to give really long tests, and it was a struggle for my students and a struggle for myself. And I realized that that was not helpful. And so I'm really glad that I went through this process and learned the difference between an assessment and a test. And I think now my assessment items help me key into the items that the students are understanding and not understanding, and then it makes me a better teacher. And I'm also doing a lot more individual teaching, whereas before I taught the whole group, and now I focus on students that are having certain troubles with certain concepts.
Looks like Dave's muted again.
I was muted again. Thank you. Sorry about that.
You got it.
Sorry, Gretchen. What I was saying was you mentioned shorter, more concise assessments, checking for understanding. Would you say safely that saved you time?
Not this year, because I've spent so much time writing better quality assessment questions, but I'm certainly looking forward to it next year.
And excellent. I appreciate, I was trying to set you up so you'd give a great answer that everyone would buy into, like, hey, it saves me time. But I really appreciate what you said, because part of what we talked a lot about with the group was the number one, when we create quality items that can then build off the subsequent items, they don't go away. And so what I heard you say is there was an investment of time maybe in 2017, 2018 that's going to pay off, or 2016, 17 that's certainly going to pay off going into next year.
Right.
So there's a question that came that I'm going to kind of pose to you from Carol. It says, what is the intention of the work? Will there be learning opportunities for other educators in South Dakota in the future?
Yeah, so the intention of this work was to, one, support the science standards implementation and to explore, basically through a pilot method, a new platform for assessment processes. And South Dakota is actually a part of a grant with 12 other states right now, and we're exploring formative assessment. And so through this work, right now we're in like a needs assessment stage. So we're pulling in information, and some of you on the call may have participated in some of these focus groups that we've done around the state. We did some with curriculum directors. We've done some with teachers, and what we're pulling in is information about equity, coherence in the system, and also their understanding of formative assessment. So this is an area that we're going to look to support in those following dimensions. Our Science Advisory Council that we just created met yesterday, and we're creating a vision right now, and that Advisory Council is going to start going through this focus group data. And so something that we're really looking toward is evidence from that, and then hopefully we can pull in evidence from, that I can pull out of the reflections from all of these individuals and bring it to the Advisory Council so we can make some decisions on supporting educators in the future. I can tell you that my priority is going to be supporting the teachers that went through this process already, because they've built expertise in this area, and how professional learning is. If they've experienced it for a year, we need to be able to support them a little bit longer so it can become formal practice, and we can truly support their needs. But I think that Dave Nagel has been one of the most amazing people to work with throughout this process in terms of his flexibility and his commitment to supporting us. He's offered webinars, recorded webinars he's created on his own for support. We've provided other webinars for the educators themselves. And I would encourage you to contact me if your teachers are interested in this, because I know that Dave and I are very flexible in terms of our ability to communicate with districts. He has online support processes. There's ways to get him out here to South Dakota if we have enough interest among districts. So if you do have interest, that's something that you can contact me or you can contact Dave directly. But it'd be interesting to see if we could get a critical mass of districts involved or interested in working with this, because I know that a lot, especially with the teachers that are already engaged, they're looking for continued support. So.
Sam, thanks so much. I really appreciate that. And I will say, and without any lack of honesty or authenticity, the support from Sam as leading the group and providing the site, the location, the opportunity to learn, to be flexible with the group, and then also really the teachers that came, there was a desire to learn. And one thing about the process, just kind of highlighting when there's several ways to look at how CFA 2.0 can come into a school or a district, or we work in several states and work in all 50, but several states where districts have partnered together. Financially, there's a cost through Corwin, obviously, but districts that have said, hey, if we bring some of our teachers and you bring some of yours, we kind of split the fund. So there's ways to get to that piece. But teachers go through either 2 or 4 days, and I'm one who will always advocate for the 4 days. They never necessarily need to be back to back. But one of the things I think that was critical was when the teachers came and those first 2 days, I was very honest that some of the assessment practices are going to challenge all of us, meaning that they might not be what we have been used to. That doesn't mean what we've always been doing be thrown away, but it also doesn't mean that what we have always been doing maybe has worked. So we talked several times of bringing in visible learning and John Hattie's message about how do we know our impact. And I would say, and Jamie and Gretchen, I really appreciate you sharing your thoughts and your takeaways, that there was a shift in the mind frame of assessment as feedback for us. And I think for
Right.
all teachers, but as a secondary teacher, sometimes more often than not, we might think that we're assessing to grade. Doesn't mean we can't put it in the grade book, but we're really assessing because we are seeking feedback so we know what to do next. And that, I think, has been, to me, what's more important to the shift. Certainly we want to change practice, but we can change practice and not necessarily have belief change, and then eventually we kind of revert. And so anyone that has any thoughts or questions about how to move forward, I'm going to pop my email up here in just a moment. Certainly you can reach out to Sam, but there's a lot of roads to build towards bringing in some of this work. The group we went through was probably the best setup in that we had 4 days of the actual, with my fingers, the workshop time and element, but then more importantly, we had the follow-up implementation days, but it doesn't have to necessarily be that specific. So any other questions, whether they want to come verbally or through the chat function, we'd be happy to address
Hey,
them.
this is Gretchen, and I'd chime in something on that. And I just say that I actually thought it was really beneficial that our first 4 days were 2 days and then almost a month in between and then 2 more days, because that gave us time to get the textbook, read over it, look at the setup, practice it, write what we needed to write, and then when we went back for day 3 and 4, we had time to work on it. And so that worked really well.
Thanks, Gretchen. Could not agree more. And while certainly there's, schools always have to budget in terms of how their time frame works more than their finances, I would not be one that would recommend 4 days in a row.
Right.
And one of the reasons is when we look at the evidence around conceptual learning, which a lot of what CFA is conceptual to start with. Certainly there's a product in the 10 steps. There's definitely the need to get away from it. But at the same time, I've worked in a few districts where we did a couple days in October and didn't come back until January or February. That was a little bit too long of a lag. So I felt like that month, not only because I felt the group, and I mean this sincerely, was just really eager to learn and follow through with any of the homework and things, but also I think that's a nice time frame in terms of get away from it a little bit and come back to it. So any other big questions? Because part of what we wanted to do was keep this as short and concise, but the feedback hopefully we would get from anyone was to say if we want to do several of these, and I'm more than willing to create short snapshot recorded webinars on each of the steps that we could have. We're usually looking at a 30 to 40 minute webinar that's at the end of a long day and towards the end of a long week is usually enough. But any thoughts or questions, and please, if you don't have time to share them now, send them to myself, but also more importantly, send them to Sam. But any other thoughts from the audience? And then Sam, I'm going to let you kind of finish with any kind of final closing points.
This is Jamie. So I think one last thing that I would like to say is I know a number of districts and schools are forming professional learning communities, and I just think that this would be a fantastic topic for a group to do a professional learning community and for a department to kind of get together and be on the same page. So that would be my final comment.
Jamie, could you say that last statement again?
I just said that I think this would be a great topic for a professional learning community. So whether a district has a whole department of teachers or whether, you've got some singletons, I just think that this is a great way for teachers to come together and talk about different pedagogy, but also, even if you're teaching different content area, you still could be working on something like this in a professional learning community. So I think this has a lot of merit in the schools today and in our curriculum, and I think it'd be a good topic for professional learning communities.
Thank you. I had heard the PLC piece, and then I thought that's where you're going, and I actually I'd moved a slide, although I didn't pause the screen, but absolutely. And I think part of the benefit that we had with this group, and I don't know how well some have followed through as opposed to others, but some of our teachers in South Dakota is not alone in this, but we do have some districts across the state that are smaller that now they've got an electronic partner that they can collaborate with. Maybe not the same as we would in a PLC setting. At the same time, Jamie could be in a building when she's working with her social studies or other teachers looking at just some of those critical reading skills and elements that come into place in science. So it doesn't always have to be just the science team, but really appreciate you sharing that. And the kind of the C in common formative assessments does start with common. I really think it's important that we focus more that the formative assessment is of quality. The more we can do that across classrooms to compare results and look at best practices, that augments. But I think we've seen a lot of common tests that might have been created collaboratively, but they didn't have the same quality. So certainly that's an important element. Thank you for sharing. Sam, any final thoughts?
Nope, I just put, again, open the door for conversations with districts and with teachers just to help me collaborate, help collaborate with me to find ways to, make this work. Again, Dave and I are both open to having those conversations about whether it's extending this professional learning or finding a way to make it work within particular districts. That brainstorming up front is something that we want to do because we've seen the success, and we want to find a way to support the districts in this work. So again, I think contacting us at our email address is probably the best way to keep this conversation going.
Well, I appreciate everyone for being online. Gretchen and Jamie, I'm going to reach out to you shortly because I've got a gift for participating, but really thank you both for sharing, to me, what's the most important perspective, not for myself or certainly Sam, I appreciate your words, but from the classroom teacher level, because that's where the rubber not only meets the road, but if teachers who are, if anything, always busy and certainly challenged with time, I think that's a testament to that. So, and then finally, Sam, I will send you just maybe an updated version of some of the tools and instruments that we've shared, and I've kind of tweaked some of them, and we can send them out. And so, anybody that has any questions or thoughts on those, please reach out. But thank you, everybody, for your time, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.
All right, you're welcome.
Thanks so much.